Have you ever found yourself in the same endless loop, like a frantic kitten chasing its own tail? You watch it whirl faster and faster, convinced that if it just exerted a little more energy, a bit more speed, it would finally grasp that elusive prize. But the more it strains, the further out of reach the tail seems to be. Then, without warning, the cat simply stops. It settles, lets out a massive yawn, and starts a lazy cleaning of its paws. And right there, nestled close and peaceful, is the very tail it was relentlessly pursuing. This, my friends, is a potent metaphor for the human struggle. We dedicate our existence to the pursuit of joy, achievement, tranquility, and connection. We spin ourselves into a frenzy, pushing, straining, and aggressively fighting the natural rhythm of our experience, mistakenly viewing life as a demanding equation to be solved, rather than a magnificent reality to be embraced. What if I told you the sheer force of your effort is the very obstacle keeping you from what you desire? What if the ultimate secret to obtaining everything is the wisdom of desiring nothing? We are indoctrinated from an early age that life is a hard-won campaign. We're taught to battle for our standing, to aggressively overcome setbacks, and to conquer all challenges through brute willpower. This is perhaps the greatest collective deception of our era. We are led to believe that supreme effort, meticulous planning, and ironclad control can force the universe to conform to our individual demands. However, genuine life, the current of reality, operates quite differently. Life is more akin to flowing water than solid rock, more like an improvised melody than rigid clockwork. Consider the simple act of breathing for a moment. Right now, without a conscious command, your lungs are effortlessly expanding and contracting. There is no need for thought, strategic management, or coercion for it to happen. It simply flows. Now imagine deciding you must perfectly govern every inhalation and exhalation. If you attempted to time each breath flawlessly, to micromanage every single air exchange, you would rapidly induce anxiety, constriction, and a total loss of your natural internal rhythm. The act of forcing itself would utterly disrupt the inherent ease that was already in place. This is exactly how we treat our lives. We take a process that should be as natural as breathing and transform it into a grueling fight. We force our relationships, demanding they conform to our precise expectations. We force our careers, relentlessly climbing and striving until the original motivation for success is utterly forgotten. We force our happiness, chasing brief pleasures and desperately avoiding discomfort until we are completely depleted by the exertion. Yet, there is an alternative path. There is an ancient, profound philosophy that speaks of Wu Wei, which translates roughly to action through non-forcing. It embodies the nature of water, which always finds its destination, not by clashing with obstacles, but by gracefully flowing around them. Water never struggles against the terrain. It acknowledges what is present and determines the path of least resistance. And in due course, with patient persistence, it gently sculpts canyons and redefines mountains. I recall an individual who spent decades trying to force his way into happiness. He clocked punishing 16-hour days, convinced that enough earnings, the right property, and the ideal partner would finally deliver contentment. He painstakingly mapped out every aspect of his existence, scheduling every minute and controlling every possible variable. And still, the harder he pushed for his personal vision of the good life, the more his misery deepened. One day, completely spent and disheartened, he found himself seated by a riverbank. He possessed no energy left for planning, forcing, or striving. He simply observed the water passing by, and in that moment of absolute surrender, an extraordinary shift occurred. He experienced a profound stillness he had never known, a satisfaction entirely detached from his external circumstances. The happiness he had chased for years was right there. It had always been present, patiently waiting beneath the frantic surface of his activity. This is the great cosmic joke. When you cease to forcefully wrestle with life, when you gently relax your grip and permit things to exist as they are, you realize that what you were searching for was never absent. It was merely obscured by the heavy-handed effort you were applying to find it. Let me be perfectly clear. When I advocate for non-forcing, I am not promoting passivity or apathy. I am not suggesting you should never act or simply drift without direction. The mastery of non-forcing is far more nuanced. It is about recognizing the crucial distinction between action that springs from a natural, authentic response and action born from desperate, anxious grasping. Consider the exemplary archer. When the master draws the bowstring, the action is marked by immense power and perfect form. But there is absolutely no forcing, no straining, and zero attachment to the specific outcome. The archer achieves a state of oneness with the bow, the arrow, and the target. The release occurs spontaneously at the precise instant, like a perfectly ripe fruit detaching from the branch. This is the definition of acting without forcing. You can continue to work, to innovate, to pursue ambitions, but you do so with a light touch. You plant the seeds and provide the necessary nourishment, but you don't aggressively yank the shoots to accelerate their growth. You execute your part, and then you step back, allowing life to do what life is designed to do. But here's the most compelling part. Most of us are so thoroughly conditioned to force our way through life that we've completely forgotten what natural action feels like. We've lost the ability to distinguish between flowing harmoniously with the current and exhausting ourselves by swimming against it. So, how do you start noticing the difference? Tune into the internal sensation when you are taking action. When you are forcing, there is an undeniable sense of internal strain, tightness, and a desperate necessity for things to unfold in one specific way. There's often a relentless inner monologue. This absolutely must succeed, or I need this outcome, or else. When you are flowing, there is still vigor and resolve, but the feeling is more like effortless play than arduous labor. There is a spontaneous ease to it, like a bird's unburdened flight, or a flower's silent unfolding. Forcing feels like pushing an enormous boulder uphill. Flowing feels like effortlessly sailing with a powerful tailwind. Both require skill and awareness, but one is a futile battle against nature, while the other is a collaborative dance with it. I once worked with an artist, Sierra, who discovered this distinction in the most unexpected way. She was a painter who had spent years attempting to force herself to produce groundbreaking masterpieces. She would sit rigid at her easel for hours, literally wrestling with the canvas, driven by a desperate need to create something monumental that would validate her existence as an artist. Her work from this period was constrained, over-controlled, and fundamentally soulless. Then, one frustrating afternoon, she hurled her brushes down and walked away. She didn't paint for weeks. Slowly, however, she began to casually pick up a pencil, sketching small, insignificant moments that simply caught her attention. A shaft of light on a wall, her hand holding a mug. There was no pressure, no ambition, no forcing. She was simply engaging in the pure joy of creation, the way a child does. And a profound change took root. These simple sketches held a vitality, a raw spontaneity, and a unique beauty that all her forced masterpieces had lacked. When she finally returned to the easel, she carried this new spirit with her. Instead of attempting to create great art, she simply painted what wanted to be painted through her. And paradoxically, this is when her art truly ascended. This is the mystery of not forcing. When you stop striving so hard to be somebody, you finally become yourself. When you stop frantically grasping for fulfillment, you discover the wholeness that already resides within you. When you stop coercing life to be different, it unveils its inherent miraculousness exactly as it is. But let's bring this down to earth. How do you implement this in a world that relentlessly celebrates and rewards struggle? How do you halt the pushing when every cultural signal tells you to push harder? The foundational step is recognizing that the vast majority of what you believe you must force is, in truth, entirely unnecessary. We are conditioned to think we must force our way into success, but success born of forcing rarely delivers genuine satisfaction upon arrival. We force ourselves to feel happy, but forced happiness is merely a hollow performance. We force relationships to endure, but relationships requiring constant, exhausting coercion are likely transmitting a vital message about their natural viability. Begin by pinpointing where you are currently forcing in your life. Are you forcing yourself to remain in soul-draining situations? Forcing yourself to project an identity that is not yours? Forcing others to conform to your behavioral expectations? Forcing solutions onto problems that might gracefully dissolve if simply left untouched? I recall a client who was intensely preoccupied with his rebellious teenage son. Poor grades, late nights, general disconnect. The father had implemented every strategy: draconian rules, expensive tutors, emotional lectures, severe punishments. Nothing worked. The greater the paternal force, the stronger the son's resistance. Finally, utterly exhausted by the conflict, the father adopted a radically different approach. Instead of forcing his son to change, he simply made himself fully present and available. He abandoned the lecturing and began truly listening. He stopped the punishing and started cultivating trust. He maintained his role as a father, but relinquished the suffocating role of controller. The outcome was astonishing. Liberated from the constant pressure of correction, the son naturally began to chart his own course. The rebellion, which had seemed so destructive, was revealed to be a natural, powerful attempt to self-discover. When the forcing ceased, authentic communication became possible. The relationship, which was fracturing under the weight of control, began to heal in the space of acceptance. This is the core of my message. When you stop forcing life, everything shifts. It won't necessarily change according to your expected or demanded timeline. It will change precisely in the way it fundamentally needs to change, the way it was always attempting to change before your desperate forcing blocked the path. Here is a realization that might surprise you. Non-forcing does not mean not caring. In fact, it typically signifies a far deeper, more evolved form of caring. When you stop clinging desperately to specific outcomes, you are liberated to give your full, undivided attention to the ongoing process. When you are not consumed by the result, you can become truly immersed in what is unfolding in the present moment. Consider the stark difference between a parent who forces a child to achieve for the sake of the parent's own need to feel good, and a parent who encourages a child's growth purely out of unconditional love for the child. The first is driven by the parent's insecurities. The second is entirely focused on the child's true well-being. The former generates hostility and intense pressure. The latter fosters safety and genuine empowerment. When you release the need to force, your ability to love expands, because your love is no longer conditional on receiving specific behaviors. You work with greater efficacy because your efforts are not burdened by a frantic attachment to a particular result. Your leisure becomes genuinely joyful, not just another disguised form of self-improvement labor. There's an ancient Taoist parable about a man whose horse ran away. His neighbors rushed to console him, declaring, "What terrible misfortune!" The man simply replied, "Maybe." The next day, the horse returned, bringing several magnificent wild horses with it. The neighbors rushed to congratulate him on his incredible luck. Again, the man said, "Maybe." When his son attempted to break one of the wild horses and broke his leg, the neighbors offered their deepest sympathies. The man responded, "Maybe." Soon after, a brutal war swept through the region, and all young men were conscripted into the army, except his son, who was spared because of his severe injury. The insight here is not that we should cultivate indifference to life's events. It is that we lack the perspective to truly comprehend the significance of any single event within the vast, complex tapestry of our entire existence. When we attempt to forcibly label events as inherently good or bad, when we desperately need things to be one way or another, we fail to perceive the deeper, subtle intelligence that is constantly at work. Life possesses its own inherent wisdom, its own precise timing, and its own inevitable way of unfolding. When we stop imposing our limited, small-scale plans onto this magnificent, larger intelligence, we can finally begin to cooperate with it. We can join the dance of life instead of constantly wrestling it to the ground. But what of our ambitions, our goals, our dreams? Am I suggesting you simply drift without any purposeful direction? Absolutely not. Intentions and goals are beautiful tools. The critical question is how you hold them. Do you hold them with a light, open hand, like a fragile butterfly that is free to depart at any moment? Or do you clutch them so fiercely that you inadvertently crush the very thing you are trying to protect? There is a vast gulf between having preferences and being intensely attached to outcomes. You are free to prefer that things evolve in a certain direction, while simultaneously remaining fully receptive to all other possibilities. You can strive toward your objectives while maintaining a curious openness about what reality truly wants to manifest. You can harbor powerful dreams while being completely willing to be genuinely surprised by the course of your life. I once met a woman who had dreamed of becoming a medical doctor since childhood. She excelled academically, prepared exhaustively for the entrance exams, and submitted her applications only to be rejected from medical school. She could have chosen to force it, spent years reapplying, taken out massive loans for specialized prep courses, and made her entire existence revolve around gaining entry. Instead, she allowed herself to grieve the disappointment, and then, sincerely, asked herself, what else feels ready to happen now? She ultimately became a dedicated nurse, then an advanced nurse practitioner, and eventually established a thriving community clinic, serving people who could not afford traditional medical's care. Years later, she recognized that this unplanned path had allowed her to provide more intimate, far-reaching help to a greater number of people than she likely ever could have as a conventional physician. Her dream was fulfilled, but not via the narrow, forced pathway she had initially envisioned. This is the profound intelligence of life. When we stop restricting reality with our limited personal vision, reality is granted the space to reveal possibilities we could never have strategically plotted. The universe is infinitely more creative than our personal will alone could ever be. Now, let me address a major fear you might be grappling with. If I stop forcing, won't I just become lazy? Won't I lose my competitive edge, my drive, my capacity to achieve anything significant? This is a deep-seated fear, and it is founded on the faulty belief that forcing is the sole alternative to complete collapse. But consider this: what actually provides you with sustainable energy? Doing something you genuinely love, that flows naturally from your core interests, or forcing yourself through something you detest because you feel you must. What yields superior, more lasting results? Work that is the product of authentic enthusiasm and inherent skill, or work born from grim, exhausting determination? When you stop forcing, you do not lose your power. You uncover your authentic power. You move beyond the fragile, draining power of willpower that must be constantly fueled by sheer effort. You tap into the inexhaustible, renewable power of natural action. Instead of fruitlessly pushing against the tide of life, you learn to harness life's own tremendous energy to achieve what truly needs to be accomplished. This transformation is not instantaneous. Most of us have been forcing for so long that we have forgotten the feeling of our natural rhythm. We've been swimming against the current for so many years that the sensation of flowing with it is alien. Learning the art of non-forcing is much like learning to float in water. Initially, relaxing and trusting the water to support you feels terrifying. But the moment you realize that relaxation actually enhances your buoyancy, everything changes. So, how do you begin practicing this essential art of non-forcing? Start small. Identify the minor instances where you're exerting unnecessary pressure. Perhaps you are forcing conversations, trying too hard to be impressive or fascinating. Instead, try simply listening, cultivating a genuine curiosity about the other person. Perhaps you are forcing your way through traffic, fighting every slow driver and red light. Try accepting the pace that is currently present, using the time instead to breathe deeply or observe your surroundings. Pay attention to your physical body. Forcing always generates physical tension. Your shoulders creep up, your jaw clenches, your breathing becomes restricted and shallow. When you detect this tension, it is an unmistakable signal that you are working against the flow. Take a deep, grounding breath. Consciously drop your shoulders and ask yourself, what would this look like if I stopped forcing it? Observe the character of your thoughts when you are forcing. They possess a desperate, monotonous quality. This has to work. This has to work. Or, why is this not happening faster? Or, I should be much further along by now. These thoughts are a form of mental strain that creates suffering without delivering any genuine improvement. When you catch yourself in this mental forcing loop, try replacing the pushing thoughts with curious ones. Instead of "this has to work," try "I wonder what will emerge." Instead of "why isn't this happening faster," try "what is this current pace trying to reveal to me?" But perhaps the most vital understanding of non-forcing is that it does not mean becoming inert. It means becoming responsive instead of merely reactive. It means learning to sense what the living moment demands, rather than aggressively imposing your rigid, predetermined agenda onto every situation. Sometimes the moment calls for stillness, and you rest without guilt or restlessness. Sometimes it calls for decisive action, sometimes for quiet observation, sometimes for pulling back, sometimes for pushing ahead. The mastery lies in learning to feel what is needed, rather than deciding in advance what you believe should happen. This level of responsiveness requires a quality of deep attention that our hyper-busy culture rarely encourages. We are programmed to be relentlessly active, to be doing something constantly, to fill every vacant moment with entertainment or labor. But true responsiveness demands stillness, space, and the cultivated ability to listen to the subtle currents of life. It's the difference between a person who talks incessantly and a person who possesses the wisdom to know when to speak and when to listen. The constant talker may generate a lot of noise, but their words rarely carry true significance because they are not attuned to what the conversation truly requires. The responsive person speaks less, but when they do, their words carry power because they are perfectly synchronized with the moment. Living without forcing is exactly like this. You may do less, but what you accomplish is infinitely more effective because it is fully aligned with what wants to happen. You expend less energy, but you achieve more because you are collaborating with the forces of life instead of draining yourself, fighting against them. I will leave you with a final, short reflection. Years ago, I faced an agonizing writing deadline. I sat rigidly at my keyboard for hours, literally forcing myself to produce words. But everything I typed felt false, heavy, and dead. The more I strained, the worse the output became. I was paralyzed in a self-made cycle of forcing that produced only extreme frustration. Finally, I surrendered. I left my workspace and walked to the ocean. I wasn't attempting to solve the problem. I wasn't hunting for inspiration. I was simply walking, allowing the rhythmic sound of the waves and the feel of the sand to fill my awareness. And then, quite spontaneously, the words began to flow. Not the artificial, forced phrasing I'd been wrestling with, but something alive, something that genuinely needed to be expressed. I didn't rush back. I simply allowed the ideas to move through me as I walked, trusting that the essential core would remain. When I finally returned to write, it felt like water pouring through a clear channel. The concepts that had been blocked by my forcing came forth easily, naturally. The piece essentially wrote itself, and it was vastly superior to anything my isolated willpower could have manufactured. That experience taught me a core truth about creativity, and indeed, about life itself. The greatest things we achieve do not arise from forcing. They emerge from creating the conditions for the best, to manifest naturally. A skilled gardener never forces a flower to bloom. They provide fertile soil, essential water, and sufficient sunlight, and then they observe and trust. The blooming occurs on its own timetable. As we conclude our discussion, I want to leave you with this liberating thought. You are not fundamentally broken. You do not need to be fixed, overhauled, or radically altered. You don't need to force yourself to be different, superior, more successful, more enlightened, or more anything. What you truly require is to stop forcing and allow the intrinsic beauty that already resides within you to emerge. You are like a powerful, natural river that has been dammed by your own exhausting efforts to meticulously control its flow. When you remove that dam of incessant forcing, when you cease trying so desperately to be something other than what you authentically are, your natural, powerful current immediately returns. And that current possesses a destination and a wisdom that your calculating mind could never fully map. The changes that materialize when you stop forcing are rarely the ones you initially anticipated. They are invariably better. They are more harmonious, more surprising, and more deeply aligned with your core nature than anything your personal will could have rigidly scheduled. When you finally get out of your own way, life is granted the necessary space to reveal the full spectrum of possibility. So, I offer this invitation to you now. Notice where the forcing is happening in your life. What are you fruitlessly pushing against that might flourish if you simply allowed it to be accepted? What are you trying to manage and control that might thrive if you simply granted it the freedom to unfold? What exhausting battles are you engaging in that might resolve themselves if you consciously laid down your weapons? This is not a call to become passive or to surrender what matters to you. It is a profound request to identify the difference between the desperate, effortful action that stems from deep fear and the effortless, powerful action that emanates from profound love. It is a call to trust that life is not your enemy to be conquered, but your attentive dance partner patiently waiting for you to learn the steps. When you stop forcing life, everything changes. Not because you've successfully manipulated reality to suit your fleeting preferences, but because you finally permitted reality to reveal the magnificent gifts it was perpetually attempting to give you all along. And what it was always trying to bestow is something far more beautiful, more perfect, and more precisely what you need than anything you could have ever forced into existence. The cat has ceased its frantic, dizzying chase. It now sits quietly, whole and complete, no longer needing to capture what was, in truth, never separate from itself. This is your personal invitation. Stop spinning. Stop chasing. Sit down, deeply present in the very middle of your life, and discover that the profound thing you have been seeking is already here. It has always been here, waiting with infinite patience for the moment you finally stop forcing and simply allow yourself to be.